Welcome to Conversations on the Business of Brands with Sudeep Chawla and Sharvana Raghavan. For this episode, we welcome our first ever guest, Mr. Bharath Sastry, the CEO of Vistaprint India. Over to our hosts. Enjoy.
Pasha, we keep getting a lot of questions, around, uh, especially the people who have done classical marketing, where we propagate the fact that you should invest behind building brands, look at it slightly longer term measures, etc. On one end, we talk about this, and then there are, a lot of the startups are fund crunched, and therefore, the first and the foremost thing that they look at is performance marketing, and therefore the ACOS. What is the advertising cost to sales today? What is the kind of sale that is coming through? So how do you balance these two? How do you invest uh, behind the brand in the long run while fulfilling expectations that your investors, your employees, and everybody else has from a performance marketing point of view, that every money that you spend will be justified immediately using sales? How do you navigate that?
I normally have followed the principle of having a balance between the two. If I may say a thumb rule, a 50-50 balance between performance marketing as well as brand marketing. There may not be any right or wrong answers. That's worked for me, actually. And but doing both together really helped. What is helping nowadays is that you can actually measure this really well. You can measure the impact of both performance and brand marketing as well as together over a customer's life cycle. The earlier days where you used to say that half the marketing dollars are wasted, and I don't know which half. It's no longer true. You actually know when it's getting wasted. So for example, you can actually measure when a customer or a cohort of customers, once you put in a kind of a marketing spend, break even. And you can also calculate the lifetime value of those customers. So once they come back to you and do a repeat purchase, and how much they do. So based on history, you would actually be able to say measure it. It's easier nowadays to actually have a kind of an assessment of the spend, and the combination too. I also feel that the brand building part is not necessarily only long term. The maximum benefits are long term. For example, obviously brand building will help all the strategic aspects, right? Like market leadership, like entry barriers. Once you have a strong position in the consumer's mind, it's difficult for other people to enter and appropriate it. So entry barriers, pricing. You'll be able to actually say increase your pricing when people see more value in your brand. So these are some of the long term benefits you have from marketing, but they're not necessarily only long term. You can also, once you start doing them, you can actually have short term benefits too. So within the year, for example, say when you do brand building, you have a lot of especially in startups, you get a lot of visits to your site, right? And they would start trying out the product. So I also think it's a short term business driver as well as a long term.
That's an amazing point, Bharat, to say that there are short term benefits also to brand marketing. But a lot of the measurements today are around the performance in direct marketing and the lifetime value analysis. But are there any short term measures that we can use for brand marketing to check how well your brand on the mind measures is doing? And just to needle your insights background, are there any jugaad ways to go about doing this? Because startups don't really have the money or don't want to spend too much money on something on measuring brand marketing.
Yeah, I think some of the really easy ways are looking at the visits on your site, and if you have a site and you're doing brand building, looking at some of the visits of the site, and what are the source of the visits. So if it's directly on the site or through organic search, yeah, so that'll be some of the measures, and how that contribution of the visits from, say, the free or the brand channels is growing over time. That would be an easy measure, and you don't need to spend anything there. You can also look at, obviously, you look at, say, the contribution to revenue growth, right? The contribution of those customers to revenue growth, even in the short term. Yeah. And you would see that growing. I have actually seen that growing within a year. Once you actually start communicating about your brand, not only with respect to, say, ads or anything like that, but even when your website talks about the benefit that you offer, which is the first place to actually start with. I mean, you would see growth happening from these channels. So looking at the free and brand channels, for example, would be one measure. You could look at studies like YouTube has a brand lift study. I mean, if you do a campaign in YouTube, they do offer something called a brand lift study. So you could look at stuff like that, which give you a good idea about how your brand awareness and brand preference is moving. Yeah, I mean, if obviously, I mean, if you don't have a kind of a continuous brand track, so these are some of the things which you can look at.
People tend to take these little bits for granted, in the sense they have only one dimension of looking at these measures. I think it sheds a lot of light to say how you can actually measure your brand spends too. And not being immediately measurable is not necessarily the reason why you don't invest behind brand marketing. I think
Absolutely,
that's a, I
absolutely.
think that's a great point.
Okay, Basha, in your current stint, you must have definitely dangled into B2C as well as B2B marketing. Can you just help elaborate to our listeners your key learnings from both? How do you think both pan out on possibly, say, a digital to start with? And are there other avenues where they completely differ from each other?
Actually, I mean, personally, whenever I hear the term B2B, B2C, B2C, I think right now, right? I get completely confused. Somebody asks me, "Are you in B2B? Are you in D2C?" So yeah, I don't know what to say. So I want to say, I mean, I'm in the business of building brands, as you call it. Actually, in the classical sense, B2B actually means that you're. It's not about the customer. It's not about whether you're selling to a business or a customer. It actually means that it means that it's not a finished product that you're selling. So, I mean, you have a kind of an unfinished product to which you do modifications and sell. So that is B2B, right? And when you're selling a finished product, it is B2C. Yeah. But anyway, I mean, even after I found the definition, I mean, it is quite irrelevant actually, because I feel that all of us are in B2C. Now that C can be consumers, they can be businesses, they can be, I mean, they can be anyone actually. So as long as it's like a person or a group of persons, I think it is B2C. So that way, I mean, I've always considered myself as, say, B2C, or in the business of actually building brands for customers or consumers or people or groups of people.
A friend of mine put it saying, doesn't matter whether you're B2B, B2C, you're P2P, a person to person.
Oh
No
yeah,
matter whatever channel you're going through, it is one person is making a decision. And how you can influence that decision is all that makes the difference.
I agree. I agree.
So, because you know, I started appreciating possibly a slightly different side once I started working with Pidilite, where most of the products, while they are in the service of consumers, are used and applied by a set of contractors. Now, traditionally, while the contractor is using the product, the final benefit is derived by the consumer, and hence you are talking to an intermediary to the consumer.
Got it.
And that is possibly a lot of people meant when they said B2B, that you're talking to somebody who is a professional who is again going to use your product for somebody's satisfaction. And one of my this thing was that what the consumer derives is delight, emotional satisfaction, etc., out of the features and benefits that you provide out of a product. You're selling to a intermediary is a little more layered, because not only are you satisfying their needs, their personal needs, but you're also helping them visualize how this will satisfy the needs of their primary consumer. And hence the dialogue with a B2B consumer is a little more involved, a little more high context, high content. And hence a lot of the cases, for example, pharma companies use guys who go around from doctor to doctor, they do doctor detailing, etc., because it requires that much explanation and possibly building conviction far beyond attracting the consumer to make a purchase. So in that context, then while the overall, what I found was overall brand principles remain the same, you just need to make sure that when you're making a brand ladder, in your brand ladder you have to also keep the intermediary in your mind. So therefore there is a consumer benefit, and then there is a layer of the contractor or the intermediary benefit. And a lot of the time you would see that they might conflict, and hence you have to find mutually non-conflicting spaces for both of them, so that they become complementary to each other, rather than conflicting to each other.
Finding the commonalities, I mean, really interesting.
But getting back to what you do at Vistaprint, Basha, I loved the campaign you did about the very good tailor.
Yeah.
See a lot of the sensibilities carried on, and I didn't quite imagine at that point a business card printing company to make such an entertaining, funny communication out there. I thought it was very impressive. Could you just walk us through what thinking happened within Vistaprint? When I'm sure it must have been new to Vistaprint because it is India specific. So could you just walk us through what happened in that campaign?
Yeah, surely. I mean, it was obviously very, very enjoyable. I mean, doing the particular campaign and also doing some of our latest ones. Once you have the kind of thought in place, like you have the brand ladder in place, the brand in a page slide, which I normally follow, I've talked about the creative route, right? So the idea was to come to kind of a creative route. So how do you communicate it and what do you do? Some of the things that I have followed is actually to try to give as much freedom to the creative person as possible while keeping them rooted to the benefit, right? So as long as that is clear, try to go as wild as possible. So I actually call it go wild while being rooted. Sometimes you may tend to go wild just for the sake of it, right? Which is great advertising in itself, but it's not great advertising for the brand. And sometimes, I mean, obviously, you talk about the brand, and it may not be as say great in creativity. Actually, I would prefer the latter. I mean, it's okay not to be great in creativity, but talk about the brand rather than be outstandingly different, but talk about something really different. But when you get the combination of both, then absolutely it's wonderful. So it's one of the campaigns where it actually happened. This was done by Sideways. So I mean, some of the earlier Ogilvy guys who were there, I was in touch with. So we got talking and then talked to them about the benefit that we have. The message for Vistaprint that we want to actually create a professional identity. We wanted to talk about the emotional benefit of pride, that is associated with actually creating that identity. So that was a brief, and within that brief, I actually tried to encourage as many wild thoughts as possible.
Interesting. I'm sure Kinu would have appreciated all that encouragement from your end of going wild. Must have given him a good canvas to paint. Excellent. Basha, Sharon mentioned this earlier. The CMO on tap, the work that you did in the middle, that's a very interesting one. Honestly, not many of us have been exposed to it. Uh, how does that work, especially for the listeners that we have from the startup ecosystem? If they are considering talking to somebody like that, what should be their consideration? When should they think about talking to a CMO on tap, etc.? Just help us demystify this space a little bit.
When I was actually working on Consumer Tap, I actually found a lot of potential in the idea because many startup founders are actually trying to build a longer lasting company and a longer lasting brand, right? But many of them, I mean, are from say finance background, strategy. I mean, they're passionate about the idea, but they need kind of support in building brands. Even now, if you look at many of the startup companies, you just go to the websites, the top banner, you just see 25% off season sale, right? So I still don't understand. I mean, if you go to the top five startups you can think of and see, most of them would have this on the top banner. I mean, there is a lot of potential in actually building brands for startups. Because finally, I mean, your marquee, coming back to that, should actually talk about your brand, right? You should actually talk about what you offer to the customer. There is a lot of potential of actually building brands with startups. I mean, which I also saw. I was working with about 3 or 4 startups at that point of time. I mean, personally, I mean, I was thinking of Vistaprint under the same remit, but it just happened that I was so excited by the space that you're in that started working there full time. But the CMO on tap space, especially for startups in India, would be really add a lot of value.
Hmm. So you would therefore advise startups who don't have in-house marketing capability to engage somebody like this till they can afford a full-time CMO or some marketing guy of their own.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now a CMO on tap, therefore, it works on what you do some hours during a week. There's a certain engagement defined in terms of hours as well as deliverables? How does this work?
The idea actually is that you would be an interim marketing head for the startup, or you would be a part-time um, uh, you would be a part-time marketing resource for the startup. So it depends on the kind of work that is needed. For people who are just starting up, I mean, you could actually help in making the brand positioning as well as presenting to investors about the ideas along with the founder on what the brand is about. I mean, I had done that many a time actually, because at that point of time, people were also looking to present to investors about the idea. So I mean, once you have a kind of a brand position in place about what the customer needs, I mean, that adds a lot of strength to the idea itself. Right. So it could be either. It could be interim, or it could be a part-time.
Part-time. Interesting.
Role.
Okay.
So you said you started off with Vistaprint on a part-time basis and then gotten fully, Basha. So what does, if just to go a little deeper into what Vistaprint does, I know you print more than business cards today. You do a whole lot of merchandising. So, but just sticking to business cards, what kind of businesses still use business cards today? And what does it mean to a lot of these founders? Because I've got my business cards also from Vistaprint, but I think I've given out like 3 of them in the last 2 months. That shows a lot about my networking skills. But that aside, what do people generally use it for? Because people share contacts today, right?
Yeah, true. I mean, but it's amazing. It's one of our top growing products actually. Business cards. I mean, even now. I mean, even when you say this, because a lot of people actually obviously use it to create an impression or to create an identity about what they do, about what the company does, and they obviously give it to promote their business. I mean, we were talking about the Taylor ad. I mean, there you actually talk about the kind of, say, pride you are associating with your identity, right? With the fact that, I mean, I have a kind of an identity, so I have actually started a business, or I have actually started something which is going to last for longer, or I'm in the process of creating a legacy. So those are some of really the kind of say emotions that are attached. I mean, when you're actually creating an identity. So even when you've done your business card, even if you've not like given it to people, I mean, the fact that you're seeing it and feeling and looking at your logo and feeling a kind of association with it itself is something.
Right. I think that's very true. Even if nobody's appreciating or nobody's seeing your brand, the fact that you see it gives you the pride and the chance to go on a daily basis.
No, I think Sharan has also found, for example, various ways of making his brand reach people, and hence possibly he might not need the business card as much. But you're right, Basha, a lot of the people who are just starting up, not even just founders, just small business owners, will derive so much pride and joy out of it. I can actually make see your ad actually makes it come alive.
That's the end of the third part of the interview. To watch the final part, please click next or the video displayed here on the end screen. Thank you for watching CoBB. Conversations on the Business of Brands with Sudeep Chawla and Sharvana Raghavan.